Good afternoon. Today we are going to look at time and place relative clauses. Before we start, let's look quickly at the relative pronouns that we will study today. If I'm going to modify a place, I use where, and where replaces a phrase of location and modifies that place with an action that occurs there. If I'm going to modify a time, I use when, and when replaces a phrase of time and modifies that time with an action that occurs then. Now let's look at some examples with when. For example, Mother's Day is an American holiday. On that day, Americans celebrate mothers. You can see that on that day substitutes Mother's Day. Both of these sentences can be combined using the relative pronoun when. For example, Mother's Day, when Americans celebrate mothers, is an American holiday. As you can see, when replaces a phrase of time, that is, on that day, and modifies that time, that is Mother's Day, with an action, that is, Americans celebrate mothers. And so we have the relative clause, when Americans celebrate mothers. Please note that the relative clause must follow the noun it modifies. Therefore, Mother's Day, when Americans celebrate mothers, must be together. Let's look at another example. Tuesday is my favorite day. On Tuesday, I call my mother. Please note that on Tuesday substitutes Tuesday. We can combine both of these sentences using the relative pronoun when. For example, Tuesday, when I call my mother, is my favorite day. Please note that when replaces a phrase of time, that is, on Tuesday, and modifies that time, which is Tuesday, with an action, that is, I call my mother. And so we have the relative clause, when I call my mother. Once again, please note that the relative clause, when I call my mother, must follow the noun it modifies, that is Tuesday. Now let's look at examples for where. Dana Point is my favorite spot. I often surf there. Please note that there replaces Dana Point. Both of these sentences can be combined by using the relative pronoun where. For example, Dana Point, where I often surf, is my favorite spot. As you can see, where replaces a phrase of location, that is, there, and modifies the place, that is, Dana Point, with an action, that is, I often surf there. And so we have the relative clause, where I often surf. Please note that the relative clause, where I often surf, must follow the noun, Dana Point. Let's look at another example. Coffee is good in that cafe. I used to work there. As you can see, there replaces that cafe. Both of these sentences can be combined using the relative pronoun where. For example, coffee is good in that cafe where I used to work. As you can see, where replaces a phrase of location, that is, there, and modifies the place, that is, that cafe, with an action, that is, I used to work. And so we have the relative clause, where I used to work. Once again, please note that the relative clause, where I used to work, follows the noun, that cafe. Now let's compare time and place relative clauses with subject and object relative clauses. A common mistake is to use when as a subject or an object relative pronoun. For subject and object relative pronouns, use that, the zero allomorph, or which instead. Let's look at some examples. As a subject relative clause, weeks start on Mondays when make me sad. When is incorrect, instead use which, because this is a subject relative clause. That is, Mondays make me sad. Now let's look at an example with the object relative clause. I call my mom on Wednesdays when I like. When is incorrect. Instead use which, because this is an object relative clause. That is, I like Wednesdays. A common mistake is to use where as a subject or an object relative pronoun. This is incorrect because where is neither an object nor a subject relative pronoun. For subject and object relative clauses, use that, the zero allomorph, or which instead. Let's look at an example with a subject relative clause. That's the coffee shop where makes good coffee. Here, where is incorrect. Use which instead, because this is a subject relative clause. That is, the coffee shop makes good coffee. Now let's look at an example with an object relative clause. This is the coffee shop where I like the most. Here, where is incorrect. Instead, use the zero allomorph because this is a object relative clause. That is, this is the coffee shop I like the most. In other words, I like this coffee shop the most. Now let's do some 10-second practice exercises. Please take 10 seconds to choose which word best fits in the blank. In-N-Out, where he used to work, is delicious. This is a place relative clause. That is, he used to work at In-N-Out. At In-N-Out is a place. Next. Halloween, which I love, is a scary holiday. Here, which I love is an object relative clause. That is, I love Halloween. Halloween is the object of the sentence. Next. Thanksgiving, when our family meets, makes me happy. Here, when our family meets, is a time relative clause. That is, our family meets on Thanksgiving. On Thanksgiving is a time. Next. Clark Park, which is big, has a large pond. Here, which is big, is a subject relative clause. That is, Clark Park is big. That is, Clark Park is the subject of the relative clause. Next. Clark Bookstores, where I buy my books, is cheap. Where I buy my books is a place relative clause. That is, I buy my books at Clark Bookstores. At Clark Bookstores is a place. Next. December 24th, when I travel home, is Christmas Eve. When I travel home is a time relative clause. That is, I travel home on December 25th. On December 25th is a time. Next. I take a break on Saturday, which is my favorite day. Which is my favorite day is a subject relative clause. That is, Saturday is my favorite day. Saturday is the subject of the relative clause. Next. The library which he likes is big. Which he likes is an object relative clause. That is, he likes the library. The library is the object of the relative clause. Now let's do a quick summary. To modify a place, use where. Remember that where replaces phrases of location and modifies the place with an action that occurs at that place. Where can be used to combine two sentences. For example, coffee is good in that cafe. I used to work there. Both of these sentences can be combined using the relative pronoun where, such as, coffee is good in the cafe where I used to work. Remember that to modify time, we use when. Remember that when replaces phrases of time and modifies the time with an action that occurs at that time. Pronoun when can be used to combine sentences. For example, Tuesday is my favorite day. On Tuesday, I call my mother. Both of these sentences can be combined using the relative pronoun when, such as, Tuesday, when I call my mother, is my favorite day. I often surf at 5 a.m. When is my favorite time? And at Dana Point, where is near my home. Is this sentence correct? Please take 10 seconds to decide. The answer is no. The sentence is incorrect. Remember that we do not use when and where as subject or object relative pronouns. Instead, we use that, the zero allomorph, or which. So here, instead of when and where, use which. I often surf at 5 a.m., which is my favorite time, and at Dana Point, which is near my home. That concludes my presentation. If you have any thoughts, questions, or concerns, please email me, and I look forward to seeing you in class. Please have a good rest of your day.